Good day. Welcome to the 40th episode of the series Decolonizing the Mind. Um, this series deals with topics from my book, Decolonizing the Mind, which was published in January of last year. It is 600 pages, and I'm dealing with chapter 9 on economic theory. And today I'm going to discuss China, the economic development of China, and why it will be very important for the future. But before I do that, let me discuss the aftermath of the Iranian strike on Israel, on occupied Palestine. After the strike, the Israelis tried to do something which was really nothing. But there was a meeting in following the strike that shows you how Iran is now embedded in an international security and military arrangements being made by Iran, North Korea, Russia. There was a meeting in Moscow on April the 25th of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And this is an organization, an Eurasian organization established by China and Russia in 2001. So that's more than 20 years ago. And it focuses on security. It discusses political, economic, and international security and defense issues related to one another. And only recently, last year, July 4th, Iran joined the SCO. So on April the 24th, North Korea sent a delegation to Iran to discuss cooperation, which I guess is economic, military, defense, whatever. North Korea has nuclear weapons. And then you had the meeting the following day with the Russian Defense Minister Shoigu with his Iranian counterpart. Shoigu says he's ready to expand military cooperation with Iran, and the defense minister of Iran had meetings with China and India. India is also part of Shanghai Cooperation Organization. So it's important to see that there are military arrangements being made in case the US decide to expand the war in West Asia. And also interesting is to know that Israelis are, with the help of the United States, are moving towards reviving the talks with Arab nations who wanted to normalize relations with Israel, and the normalization was then stopped after the Gaza invasion by Israel. But Israelis were in Saudi Arabia trying to discuss discuss reviving the talks. So let's go to China. In China, in the last 50 years, a miracle happened, last 40 years. And to understand the magnitude and nature of this miracle, I'll give you some statistics. In 1949, when the Socialist Republic of China was founded, established, 80% of the population was illiterate. And 60, 70 years later, it went down to 3%. 1952, the average life expectancy was 36 years. In 2020, it was 77 years. More than twice, it has doubled, more than double. In 1952, the total GDP was 0.03 trillion US dollars. In 1990, it was 1.4, and from 1990 to 2022, in 30 years, it increased tremendously to 30 trillion, surpassing the United States, as I explained in my previous video. In 1949, the per capita income in China was 663 US dollars. In 1990, it's 981, and in 2000, it was 21,843. So the increase between 1949 and 1990, let's say about 40 years, wasn't that big, from 600 to 900, let's say 700 to 1,000. But in 30 years, it went from around 1,000 to 21,000. That tells you that the economic miracle of China is something of the past 30 years, 40 years. And the World Bank study of 2022 says that China had uplifted 800 million people out of extreme poverty, which has not been seen anywhere in world history. So this is a major achievement. Now, to understand the nature of it, you have to understand what it means, poverty alleviation. First, it means that the difference between urban and rural areas are decreasing. Housing programs enable people to build or rent houses. People in the rural area who once lived in dilapidated mud and straw cottages now live in decent housing. They have decent clothes. They have access to safe drinking water, garbage disposal, and sewage treatment. A water infrastructure enables irrigation in rural area. So the rural area of China has been upgraded enormously. Soil and water conservation are part of a strategy of eco-environmental conservation. People have access to medical service, medicines, doctors, hospitals, elderly care, and social assistance. There's a system of social security that enables people who are in dire need to get help. Old people now get a pension. Public services have been improved significantly. All school-aged rural children receive kindergarten and elementary education within their own villages. Electricity makes it possible to have light, refrigerators and other consumer goods, television, internet access, mobile phones, computers. Villages with electricity can develop their own economic base. This base is enforced with the building of new roads, including highways and railways. People now can move to find work or establish enterprises and earn money with economic activity. Government credits for startups have a greater tolerance for non-performing loans in several impoverished areas. The Chinese program of poverty alleviation has strengthened the traditional cultures of different ethnic groups. New cultural centers are established that protect and promote traditional culture, folk culture, and fine craftsmen, and this opens the door to tourism, mainly local tourism. Another cultural effect is that the mindset changes when people are climbing out of poverty. They are more confident and self-assured. They strive for excellence and hard work. They value material progress. They don't take it for granted. And they are more involved in decision-making processes in their own communities. The Chinese programs have targeted specific groups for additional assistance: women, children, the elderly, and the disabled. But it's not only the alleviation of extreme poverty, it's also the rise of a middle class. And lifting 800 million people out of extreme poverty is a major accomplishment, but improving the living standards of hundreds of millions more who are already out of poverty, extreme poverty, but then grows to prosperity, that is also an enormous achievement. The middle class in China, people earning 713 $730 to 18,250 per year. That's the definition of middle class, let's say between 1 and 18,000, have risen from 39 million in 2000, 3% of the population, to 707 million in 2018, from 3% of the population to 50%, 51%. The middle class in China has increased enormously. This means a fast increase in the domestic market for consumer goods and thus a big impetus for economic development. Every year, 130 million Chinese leave China for visits abroad, and 90.999% return after the visits, which one wouldn't expect if they were unhappy in their country, as the West is trying to tell us all the time. So, the life of people, and I'm talking not about the 800 million people, but I'm talking about what 800 million have left out of poverty, but the other millions, almost half of the population, this is now middle class. That is enormous. China has built more than 600 new cities since 1949. And these are not expansions of existing villages or towns, but fully master planned manufactured centers of economic and social life, often built on newly developed land such as artificial land or reclaimed desert. Between 2008 and 2021, China completed almost 40,000 kilometers of high-speed railways and expected to double to 70,000 by 2035. Huge railway development with the ultra-speed train. In 2020, 75% of Chinese citizens with a population of 500,000 were connected to this network of railways. And get that in contrast, the UK had just 107 kilometers, while the United States has only one railway road that qualifies for high-speed status. China has left these so-called very well-developed countries long behind. In 2020, China National Railways was operating more than almost 10,000 high-speed trains per day, including the world's only high-speed overnight sleeper service. Mobile network. In the world, the mobile network began with the first generation, 1G, one generation, and that provided basic voice calling services in your mobile. The 2G, second generation, enabled high secure voice calls, SMS, text, and limited mobile data services. The next generation, 3G, enables wireless voice telephony, mobile internet access, fixed wireless internet access, video calls, and mobile TV. The 4G, fourth generation, offers gaming service, high definition mobile TV, video conference, and 3D television. The fifth generation 5G is much faster than 4G and enables seamless streaming of music and videos. And the sixth generation opens the door to virtual reality and artificial intelligence and is still in development. Now, China is already developing the 6G, but in 2021 they had already over 1 million, 1.2 million base stations for transmitters of 5G, with plans to triple it, going to 4 million base stations by 2025. Comparison, the USA had 100,000 in 2021. So huge infrastructural development in telecommunications. Then the space industry. In 1993, China established the National Space Administration. And the first taikonaut, which is the Chinese equivalent of the astronaut, went to space in 2003, 20 years ago. And within 20 years, they have launched the first module of the Tiangong space station. China has the second space station in the world is from China. Now, let's look at the support for the Communist Party. Harvard University has a School of Government, the John F. Kennedy School of Government. And they have a center there, the Ash Center for Democratic Governance and Innovation. And since 2003, they are conducting surveys in China. And they conclude recently, in a recent survey, they said, we find that first, since the start of the survey in 2003, Chinese citizens' satisfaction with government has increased virtually across the board, from the impact of broad national policies to the conduct of local town officials. Chinese citizens rate the government as more capable and effective than ever before. And now recently, the central government received 86% approval score and 9% disapproval. In 2016, the percentage was 93 and 4, but it's still very high, certainly compared to governments in the West. Now, what does it tell you? It tells you that really a miracle has been performed by China. And you see it in the facts. And then you ask yourself, how did they do it? And the second question is, what is the theoretical significance of the experience from a decolonizing mind point of view? What can we learn from it? Now, in order to understand what happened in China, you need to understand the economic history of China. And if you see the economic history, you will understand how big this transformation was. On July 1, 1921, the Communist Party was founded. And almost 30 years later, October 1, 1949, the People's Republic of China was proclaimed. And the core of its economic policy was central planning. They learned it from the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union provided experts, economists, who helped China to set their central planning institutions and policies. In 1953, China was a predominantly agricultural society, and with the help of Soviet experts, they implemented the first 5-year plan, which was from 53 to 57. And the goal was to develop China into an industrialized nation. The prices of goods and services were determined by the central planner, not by markets, and the resources were allocated by the planners, so there were no markets that distribute via supply and demand. And the preference was given to the development of heavy industry over light industry and to industrial output over agriculture. Enterprises were all state-owned, and inputs of labor, capital, and land were allocated by the central planners and not by the market. Producers were given target output levels to achieve this. Then you get a second 5-year plan, 1958 to 1962, the Great Leap Forward. And as Mao said, the aim was to catch up with the United Kingdom within 15 years. Now, before the second 5-year plan and the first years of the revolution, there was a distribution of land belonging to rich landlords to poor peasants. In the Great Leap Forward, everything changed. Private ownership was abolished and all households were forced into state-operated communes. The target was to increase grain production, to feed the cities, and to earn foreign exchange through exports. At the same time, there was an effort to set up a massive steel industry that extracted workers from agriculture. It was based on small backyard steel furnaces in every commune and in each urban neighborhood, and aimed to produce steel out of scrap metal. What was the result of the policy? One study gives the following summary. In 1958, 16 million peasants, about twice the size of the industrial labor force in 1957, were relocated to cities to support the expansion of industry and construction. In the winter of 1957 and 8, 1958, the government also mobilized over 100 million peasants to undertake large irrigation and land reclaiming projects and to build and operate backyard iron furnaces. But behind these statistics lay great social tensions and grave economic consequences. Peasants who were not eager to join the communes, organized communes, were branded as capitalists. Sharp political conflicts arose in villages. Agricultural production fell dramatically, leading to one of the greatest famines in modern history. Official sources, released after Mao's death, suggested that 16.5 million people died in the Great Leap Forward from hunger. Now, in 1962, the Communist Party organized the 7,000 Cadres Conference, a working conference with 7,000 party officials to evaluate the Great Leap Forward. Mao Zedong offered self-criticism and decided to take a backseat role, leaving future responsibility to Liu Shaoqi and Deng Xiaoping. Liu Shaoqi, the second president of China, made an evaluation of the Great Leap Forward in which he formally attributed 60% of the famine to natural disasters, 70% to man-made mistakes. New reforms were announced that allowed free market and household responsibility for agriculture production. And that had a backlash. Then supporters of Mao's saw this reverse as a bad thing. And they organized to start what is called the Great Proletarian Cultural Revolution that aimed to purge the Communist Party and the government from bourgeois elements who wanted to restore capitalism. Mao's Little Red Book became the ideological guidance for millions of young activists who formed Red Guards and revolutionary committees. And they accused millions of party members and government officials of being landlords, counter-revolutionaries, and rightists. These people suffered public humiliation, imprisonment, torture, hard labor, seizure of property, execution, or harassment into suicide. Wang Huning, a member of the Politburo of the Chinese Communist Party, said in 2021, more than 100 million people were attacked, of whom more than 20 million people died. Deng Xiaoping was one of the victims of the Cultural Revolution. In October 1969, he was sent to the Xinjiang County tractor factory in rural Jiangxi province to work as a regular worker. A year earlier, after being tortured, his son, Deng Pufeng, had jumped out of the window of a 4-story building and became paralyzed. And when the Cultural Revolution ran out of steam, in 1973, Premier Zhou Enlai, who still had a lot of respect in the party, brought Deng back to Beijing. Deng managed to build a following in the party and the army. On January 8, 1967, Zhou Enlai died. In September 1998 of that year, Mao Zedong died. And in October 6, a group from the army arrested the members of the Gang of Four. The Gang of Four was led by the wife of Mao Zedong, and they were the organizers of the Cultural Revolution. They weren't killed. They were sentenced to imprisonment. The wife of Mao committed suicide in 1991. One member died in prison in 1992, and the others were released from prison in 1996 and 1998. So Deng Xiaoping became the architect of the new China. He had to convince the Communist Party of the mistakes that were made during the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution and argued for market reforms. So we're going to look at how Deng Xiaoping discussed this. Was the aim of socialism, how to evaluate the years of planned economy, how to analyze the mistakes, how to use Marxism as a theoretical tool, and how to prevent economic reforms to lead to the restoration of capitalism. Deng says the aim of our revolution is to liberate and expand the productive forces. With the productive forces, he means the economy, to expand the technological base, the economic base of society. Without expanding the productive forces, the economy, making a country prosperous and powerful, and improving the living standards of the people, our revolution is just empty talk. The Gang of Four said it was better to be poor under socialism than to be rich under capitalism. This is absurd. Of course, we don't want capitalism, but neither do we want to be poor under socialism. So, these are arguments he put forward to the communists who went through the Great Leap Forward, the hunger, the famines, and the horrors of the Cultural Revolution. And he says, look, what we did was absurd. But in order to move to a new stage of the development of the economy, the productive forces, he says we must emancipate our minds. And we should do so even in answering the question as to what socialism is. So he says, basically it's decolonizing the mind, but he doesn't take colonialism, but he takes the fact that the mind has been enslaved and need to be emancipated. And even if you talk about socialism, you should need to take a fresh look at it with a fresh mind. And he says, if the economy remains stagnant and the people's living standards remain at a very low level for a long period of time, we can't say that we are building socialism. He says, socialism is not, being poor. Socialism is developing the economy to make life of people better. Now, let's see how he talks about analyzing mistakes. The Cultural Revolution was led by supporters of Mao Zedong and the Great Leap Forward also. But Deng Xiaoping was part of the leadership. So when he makes an evaluation, he says, look, Comrade Mao rendered immortal service to the party, to our party, our country, and our people throughout his life. His contribution are primary and his mistakes are secondary. So he's saying, yes, Mao was responsible for a lot of bad things, but he was also responsible for a lot of good things. So if you make an evaluation, even if you are the victim, as Deng was, from his bad policies, you don't discard the contribution that he's made, which is an honest way to deal with mistakes. He said, but to avoid mentioning his mistake because of his contribution would not be a materialistic approach. Neither is it a materialistic approach to deny his contribution because of his mistakes. And he goes on, he says, when we talk about mistakes, we shouldn't speak only of Comrade Mao, for many other leading comrades in the Central Committee made mistakes too. Comrade Mao got carried away when we launched a Great Leap Forward, but didn't the rest of us go along with him? Neither Comrade Liu Shaoqi, nor Comrade Chuen Lai, nor I, he talks about himself for that matter, objected to it. And Comrade Cheng Yun didn't say anything either. We must be fair on this question and not give the impression that only one individual made mistakes while everybody else was correct, because it doesn't tally with the facts. When the Central Committee makes a mistake, it's a collective rather than a particular individual that bears the responsibility. By taking this kind of honest approach of evaluation, you are able to uplift all these people who were part of the process, also the Maoists, to get them to understand that this is not about a new witch hunt. This is how to learn from the mistake and move forward. It's a practical approach. Then, because the party is a Marxist party, he refers to the Marxist theoretical framework. So he uses the concept of productive forces. And he says, how can China develop a productive forces? And he says, socialism is in a better position to develop productive forces, the economy, the technology, etc., is superior to capitalism. He says, this superiority should be demonstrated in that socialism provides more favorable conditions for expanding the productive forces than capitalism does. This superiority should have become evident, but owing to our differing understanding of it, the development of the productive forces has been delayed, especially during the past 10 years up to 1967. So he goes on. He goes into the difference between developing productive forces and socialism and capitalism. He says certain individuals pretending to support the reform and the open policy calls for a wholesale westernization of China in an attempt to lead the country towards capitalism. These people don't really support our policy. They are only trying vainly to change the nature of our society. If China were totally westernized and went capitalist, it would be absolutely impossible for us to modernize. The problem we have to solve is how to enable our 1 billion people to cast off poverty and become prosperous. If we adopted the capitalist system in China, probably a small number of people would be rich, while the overwhelming majority would remain in a permanent state of poverty. If that happened, there would be a revolution in China. China's modernization can be achieved only through socialism, not through capitalism. So he says, if we go full out the capitalist way, China will lose. And by modernization through socialism, China will win. And then you have to deal with the question of private ownership of means of production and the market. So he says, we can develop the Chinese productive forces with the concept of socialist market economy. And he says, it's wrong to maintain that the market economy exists only in capitalist society and there's only capitalist market economy. Why can't we develop a market economy under socialism? Developing a market economy doesn't mean practicing capitalism. While maintaining a planned economy as the mainstay of our economic system, we're also introducing a market economy. But it is a socialist market economy. Although a socialist market economy is similar to a capitalist one in method, there are also differences between them. The socialist market economy mainly regulates interrelation between state-owned enterprise, between collective-owned enterprise, and even between foreign capitalist enterprise. He's saying that market system doesn't influence the policy. It is not that the capitalists are determining the policy of the government. The capitalists do the things in economy, but the party determines the policy, not an individual capitalist like in the West. In capitalist country, the capitalists through their networks, their politicians which they buy, the institutions that they have, they determine policy. In China, private capitalists doesn't determine the policy of the CCP, the Communist Party. The Communist Party determines its own policy based on its ideology, history, and the idea of socialism with Chinese characteristics. He says, so everything we do in the final analysis, this is all done under socialism in a socialist society. We can't say that market economy exists only under capitalism. Market economy was in its embryonic stage as early as feudalist society. We can surely develop it under socialism. Similarly, taking advantage of the useful aspect of capitalist countries, including their methods of operation and management, doesn't mean that we will adopt capitalism. Instead, we use those methods in order to develop the productive forces under socialism. As long as learning from capitalism is regarded as no more than a means to an end, it will not change the structure of socialism or bring China back to capitalism. So, the difference between capitalism and socialism is a market economy as opposed to a planned economy. He says, why do some people always insist that the market is capitalist and only planning is socialist? Actually, they are both means of developing the productive forces. As long as they serve that purpose, we should make use of them. If they serve socialism, they are socialists. If they serve capitalism, they are capitalists. It's not correct to say that planning is only socialist because there's a planning department in Japan and there's also planning in the United States. But this planning in the United States and Japan are based on the interests of the capitalist class, but while planning in China is based on the interests of the population as a whole. So Deng says there's no fundamental contradiction between socialism and a market economy. The problem is, how do we develop the productive forces more effectively? We used to have a planned economy, but our experience over the years has proved that having a totally planned economy hampers the development of the productive forces to a certain extent. If we combine a planned economy with market economy, we shall be in a better position to liberate the productive forces and speed up economic growth. And he says, I'm afraid some of our veteran comrades do harbor such misgivings. Since they have been devoted to socialism and communism all their lives, they are horrified by the sudden appearance of capitalism. They can't stand it, but it will have no effect on socialism. No effect. Of course, some negative element will come in, and we must be aware of that. But it will not be difficult for us to overcome them. We'll find ways of doing so. If we isolate ourselves and close our doors again, it will be absolutely impossible for us to approach the level of the developing countries in 50 years. If the country prospers and the people's material and cultural life continually improves, what's wrong with that? You know, this is a visionary. It's not just a guy saying a few things. It's a visionary, a man who has a vision of how the world of his country, how China can change. And he was prophetic because within 4 decades they surpassed the richest, highest developed capital economy in the world, which is the USA. To be able to foresee that is really big. Now, the other thing, will capitalism lead to the restoration? Will the economic reforms lead to the restoration of capitalism? A socialist market economy means that China still has economic planning. It has 5-year plans. The 14th 5-year plan covers the period 21 till 25. So there is planning in China. It's not that there's no planning at all. Government makes plan. They make plan, economic plan, regional plan, geographical, political. They make plans that outline the path that the economy will follow. And these plans looks at what needs to be done to further improve the life of the 1.4 billion Chinese. It doesn't look primarily at what the entrepreneurs need, but how can they contribute to the larger goal of improving the living standards of the masses? Now, on the fear that the introduction of market economy will bring capitalist element that might influence society, Deng says, everybody is bound to have material interests. But this in no sense means that we encourage people to work solely for the personal material interests without regard for the interests of the state, the collective, and other people, or that we encourage people to put money above all else. If we did that, what would be the difference between socialism and capitalism? We have maintained all along that in a socialist society, there's a basic community of interest between the state, the collective, and the individual. If they clash, it's the individual interest which should be subordinate to those of the state and the collective. Well, in capitalism, this is the reverse. Where necessary, all people with a high level of revolutionary consciousness should sacrifice their personal interests for those of the state, the collective, and the people. We should make more effort to disseminate this noble outlook among our people, especially the young people. And he says the party has a particular role to prevent the restoration of capitalism with economic reforms. He says, we must work hard to strengthen ties between the party's organization and its members on the one hand and the masses on the other. We should regularly and truthfully inform the people about our country's situation, including the difficulties we face and the policies and activities of the party. We must strongly criticize and correct errors such as being divorced from the masses and being indifferent to their welfare. The masses are the source of our strength, and the mass viewpoint and the mass line are our cherished traditions. The party organizations, its rank-and-file members and cadres must identify with the masses and never stand against them. Any party organization that deplorably loses touch with the masses and doesn't meant its weight is forfeiting the source of its strength and will invariably fail and be rejected by the people. And he continues, hostile forces realize that so long as we of the older generation are still alive and carry weight, no change is possible. But after we are dead and gone, who will ensure that there is no peaceful evolution towards capitalism. He says so. We must educate the army, persons working in the organs of the dictatorship, meaning the dictatorship of the proletariat, the Communist Party members and people, including the youth. If any problem arises in China, it will arise from inside the Communist Party, meaning that if the Communist Party got corrupted, that is where the problem will begin. And in the policy of alleviating poverty, the Communist Party, played a major role. It was not just a government policies. One report which evaluates the whole process of fighting extreme poverty concludes, in the fight against poverty, officials, including first party secretaries and resident working teams, grassroots officials and party members, and volunteers have worked with diligence and a spirit of dedication in support of the poor, fulfilling their missions and their pledge to the people. Some of them have been fighting on the front line for a long time without time or energy to take care of their own families. Some have been traveling around and braving harsh natural conditions. Some have fallen sick from overwork all the year round. Some have continued work even after getting injured at work. More than 1,800 party members and officials have lost their lives in the cause of poverty alleviation. It's not just, a government policy where anonymous people execute policy. No, he tells about how people with a mindset of the Communist Party goes and lead the way. Now, what can we learn from China? The biggest lesson is this. If you are trained in Eurocentrism or Marxism, you know only two categories, capitalism and socialism. So whenever you look at a country, it's either capitalist or socialist. And the Chinese experience tells you that other categories of social systems are possible. And they call it socialism with Chinese characteristic. So if there are more models of building societies, why don't we look at a country and get rid of this dichotomy, either capitalist or socialist, and say, what is it that enables that particular country with its history, its natural resources, its political structures, what enables them to uplift people from poverty, provide security, prosperity, and fight against imperialism. So you don't work from theory, you work from facts. That is what Deng Xiaoping was repeating all the time. Truth comes from facts, not from axioms, not from propositions that you just put out like in mathematics. You look per country what is required, and then you develop a policy based on those specifics of the country. China was successful, Russia wasn't, the Soviet Union wasn't. And next episode will deal with the Soviet Union. So chapter 9 of the book deals extensively with China. You could download the PowerPoint at sandohira.com, this PowerPoint. And if you want to support the DTM channel, subscribe to it, share it with friends, families, and colleagues. Encourage them to subscribe, get involved in discussion groups. And if you want to make a donation, go at sandohira.com to see how you can do that. Thank you for your attention and hope to see you next time.